Oh, well, I wanted to
Oh,
mention something to Bryce about the tests, but it's okay.
Oh, sorry.
Maybe
I'm
real
trying.
quick. The change you suggested for version 5, I think we could try just making another question for it. It's, I mean, another step for it. And not break anything, that's what I mean.
Changes for version 5. Is that the not using the
Yes.
generic
yes,
stuff?
Exactly.
Oh, that is an idea. I actually like that idea, and that might
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
It might duplicate a bit of code, but with some
But-
refactoring, I think we can avoid it. Okay,
Exactly, yeah. Okay. That's it.
thanks. Yeah, no, that's a good, quick idea. Thanks.
Sit up there. All right. I got my keyboard back. Move my cat out of the way. I'm just looking at it. Doesn't look like we have really anything on the agenda that's no one added anything for this week.
Nope.
I see I missed last week's. It looks like there was a question about doing some triage.
Mhm. Yeah, essentially we were in the same spot as we are now, where nothing was on, but we were like, we could spend some time going through triaging.
Okay.
But we didn't have we didn't have a good idea of what to sort of prioritize in the triage, and two, I think actually that may have just been the main one.
Well, let's see. There's always, for me, I always go back and forth between working on the Weaver and working on assembly line to start. I don't know, did anything come up from today's partner meeting that's like, hey, there's an area where we should work on? That is often what drives my agenda for the week.
I mean, we could revisit our stock questions, right? That was the thought I had. It's just been a while since we looked at them, but maybe that waits till after next week.
I think
Yeah,
I think
like it
revisiting
probably
stock
does.
questions is a good way of, or like looking at the USWS or WDS thing would be a good place, good time to do that. So
Yeah, I don't really see that as a deep dive kind of thing either, too, right? It's more driven by other kinds of input than we need like the technical input of this group for. So we could start by looking at some bugs. I think like our biggest blocker, as always, on the assembly line is background processing of interviews, which just requires like someone to spend a few weeks on it and just try some stuff, which might break things that work now, probably.
yeah, I was going to say I was also a bit trying to, well, actually, this may have just been motion to stay specific, but I did just this morning ran into an issue where the review screen was trying to use as PDF.
Yeah,
and that was even though nothing, it was just, I think it was just the fact it was adding base number into the PDF. Like it timed out locally because I had uploaded a really long PDF, trying to break things and make sure that it would still go, but it times out consistently.
I was wondering if you would run into that. So I think that's why originally we just don't show the exhibits people just uploaded on that screen. So you can make a separate bundle to solve that probably. Because people don't generally necessarily need to see the things they just uploaded. They brought maybe it's good experience for them to do it, but given like how long it takes to process, it may not be a good thing for us to try to do.
Okay, I think it was mostly the fact seeing things they just uploaded was, I was going to try and keep it in, but I think it's mostly the matter of trying to still call as PDF and stuff on it, which is mostly fine, but it's one of those, I think it's a different way of, I don't know if that's any other interviews. It's a different thing that would, like, we'd have to figure out how to, if this is embedded in a table, still shuffle people to the waiting screen before shuffling them back if it's a background process thing. that makes sense.
No, I'm not sure if I do. You're saying like where would it be? What table would it be in?
So
When you say it, and do you mean the uploads they just did, like they had, or the whole bundle, or what?
yes, yeah. So if I can share my screen because I just have it up.
Yeah.
Of just what it looks like this. Of like this is just the screen that shows the exhibits, and I got this to work because, and so it shows everything in a table. It has the add action there.
Right. Does this take
but-
too long sometimes? Is that what you're saying?
That's what I was saying. Yes, I like manually had to
okay.
turn off adding Bates numbering because beforehand it would time out trying to add Bates number to the very long one, which this is fairly long, and I'm sure it wouldn't have an issue otherwise, but it's one of those things that the OCR stuff is fine with like documents this long now. And so I just wanted to make sure it was also resilient. Everything else was also resilient with documents this long.
Okay.
And I have a different way around it. Like, I think just changing how we're showing this since originally the table itself just looks like it doesn't show. Oh, it does. Okay. Like originally it was just as PDF, and I think I'm trying to change it just so it doesn't call as PDF. But the idea was that I don't know if this as PDF shows up in other places too. I lost it here. There's
Is there a way for us to try to like optimize the thumbnail generation differently? Because like for exhibits could be images. We let people upload Word documents, I guess, too, don't we?
Yes, Word documents, images, PDFs. And I think for all of them, the process right now is the DocAssemble turns everything into the PDF, and then it just manually screenshots it. I don't remember we're using what tool, but it screenshots the first page of the PDF, like at this size.
Yeah.
And so it does need to be a PDF by the end. And a thing that I'm realizing with PDFs is that you generally, to load any bit, you have to load the whole thing
Because it's
because
stream based.
it's stream based, and all of the information of like what font you're using could be at the very end of the file. So you have to load the whole file, which doesn't like, there's not like a good quick way to like, oh, just look at this little tiny bit of the file and read that really quick, and not have to read the whole 700 pages or something if it's a really big one. But that's
Maybe
just-
fall back where we don't do it if it's too long or over a certain file size to like not even require loading the page and processing the number of pages it has.
Could be the case, yeah.
So people click on it, they see the image they uploaded,
Mhm.
and their browser renders it, which is not our task to render.
No, it does fetch the whole thing, but that's not huge, I think.
Well, that's okay. I mean, because that's just file processing, and like browser can handle that just fine.
Yes,
It
yeah.
won't cause a timeout.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that? Like, it means writing our own thumbnail code, I guess. Is that going too far?
It feels like it could, but it's less of that. I think there should be a way around it. If it's not, I'll do the extra bundle thing. I was more bringing it up just because I don't know if code like this exists elsewhere. And if we're trying to find the thing that is the smallest, as like remove as PDF or put it in a background process or something, this is still might be around in some other interviews too.
Okay.
Was just the main reason I brought it up.
Yeah, I feel like there's room because we have so few interviews that use exhibits
Mhm.
for us to like kind of handle some of those, like not assume that that's the same as the wider problem of slow processing of downloads, which almost every interview has a download page.
That's fair, yeah, okay. Good.
But
I hadn't really considered that, so.
does make me think about a related thing, which was like, what are the error states and what errors do people run into, and how can we have graceful failover states for those? And this is obviously one of them.
Yeah, that's true. This is one. Just one instance with a very small thing of like maybe this break.
Well, in that example, like the as PDF, we're calling it manually in the table code, right?
Yes, yeah.
Because that's how we show the preview. And then as PDF says, do the Bates numbering first. That's part of our
Yes.
custom code for an exhibit page.
Yes, yeah.
So maybe we could add a keyword parameter there that says Bates equals false for
Just
just
turn off Bates that
for
way.
thumbnails, or like thumbnail equals true maybe is better.
That's fair, yeah. I like the idea of thumbnail equals true because it's mostly for that, because then we could just. I don't know if it's solely
Yeah,
for
then anything
thumbnail.
else we do for speeding up thumbnails can just fall under.
Yeah.
thumbnail equal true.
I like that as an API. I'm wondering, but I guess it's I guess it is sort of similar enough because it's not just the thumbnail, because the file is still generated, and that's the thing that when you click on the thumbnail, it would show you the whole file. So it is still also the rest of the file, but it's like, okay, if someone's just uploading it and making sure that they got the exact right things, they don't need to see things like Bates numbering, or we aren't doing too much else, it looks like, in the exhibit code. But I like the idea of only doing it if you're like on the final screen or whatever. Okay.
Does it say anything about Bates numbering? Like, do we have to make that a background process too? Because it is going to be an issue on some PDF someone could upload, I guess.
Oh, that is a good point. It is the OCR pages. Well, there's a background process for OCR, and it looks like OCR pages is separate from that, as in it will make all the OCR stuff in a separate background process. But we could always, well, no, we can't. It's a background process.
I mean, sequentially, we want to do the OCRing. Actually, I don't remember if those could compete with each other. Just the base numbering.
So they can't. It's if the base numbering is done, then, or sorry, if OCR is done, then it'll just use the OCR pages, and if they're not, it just won't. Is how it's set up right now.
It won't do Bates numbering.
It will do Bates numbering. It just won't use the OCR pages, even if they're like currently being OCR'd. If they're not finished, It just won't use them. And so I don't think there's any there's not like a race condition or a conflict there. Like Bates numbering won't fail solely because of something that's wrong with OCRing. If that's what you're asking, it could still fail. I think as it is now, yeah, you're right. And the base numbering could still cause it to fail. And I don't know if it's worth it to try and do the extra cache stuff in the background process, but I don't know if that would work well. I would have to double check that.
Okay.
Since I think the OCR stuff is just dealing with direct DA file objects and not the like exhibit object itself. Sorry, I'm realizing I'm looking at code.
Oh, okay.
Which would help.
I was just wondering about the sequence that happens. Well, like if someone starts OCRing and they have Bates stamping turned on, does that mean will the version that in either case, will it have Bates stamps? That's, I guess, what I'm trying to figure out. Like if it finishes OCRing, will the Bates stamps rerun? I just don't remember how we handled that.
I don't think it runs in the first place. I think the setup is the questions.
It will defer until the OCRing is done.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
So the actual
Per
start
page basis.
Yeah, so it's, you have an exhibit, you call start OCR on the exhibit. It just grabs the raw pages.
Right.
And then it starts this process in the background. And then it's going in the background, it finishes, you call as PDF
Oh,
at the end.
the base numbering happens when
Base
you
summary
call as
happens when you
PDF.
call as PDF, right
It
there.
happens in real time. Got it.
Yes, yeah. And I think the way
Okay.
around that, if we wanted to try, I could try to make that faster, but it's just by not abusing, but using the cache of
Mhm.
like in the OCR thing, try to also like change, I would have to change it around a bit so it doesn't pass files and it passes the exhibit instead, but it could also just call up as PDF once in the background task still, and then that property would be sent. And that's the thing I'm not sure is I don't know how background tasks work with passing objects back and forth.
I think the cache is
To
on a
the
per
original-
page basis,
Oh, yeah, you're right. 'Cause
per
If it's
page
not-
load basis. I mean,
that's fair. Okay.
so that wouldn't help to pre-generate it, unfortunately, at least not right now. Although that's kind of one of the things we're talking about, trying to improve, change, or at least change. I don't know if improve is the right word yet until we figure out what trade-offs that will have.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah,
Well-
no, I can look at it further. I think that was mostly just like one issue that I ran into this morning, and I was halfway through to just doing a quick monkey patch on it, and then still trying to think about how to improve it. But I can do some more things with it later, probably.
The other kind of safety issues that makes me think about, like one was we thought of maybe putting in, well, what kind of doc symbol errors do we run into is a bigger question. This is obviously an edge case, but one that could cause a doc symbol error screen.
Mhm.
We have two things we could try doing. One is we could try putting in what docassemble calls
The catch-all.
catch-all. Yeah, that's just for specifically for undefined variables. Sometimes it leads to confusing different error messages, but if we create the right set of catch-alls, at least it'll probably help people in some circumstances. Oh, there we go. Good. The other one was like the error handling page, which we don't have either of those things yet.
Yeah.
Do you think those are going to be helpful? Like as we're talking about doing like a launch of e-filing to help us be like on that special error handling page, we could help if we could let people download what's in progress, if that's possible to always do. I don't know if it is.
Mhm. I
But
like
some of the
idea.
time, at least it should be, right?
Yeah. I do like the idea. The issue is we'd have to figure out this like quote safe way to do it or to let people download the
Mhm.
documents, because the documents are like the leading cause of 4 or 504s and timeouts and stuff. And so if we throw a timeout, we don't want to have the error page that then times out because we're trying to like gather everything together for people. But if we could figure out a safe way to do it that is like maybe not calling like PDF concatenate and manually getting like different attributes of the documents. Like essentially, if anything we could do to avoid calling as PDF might help.
Or maybe being content with like, okay, we were worried about background processing and caching, but maybe we just show people a wait screen. Like, hey, we're trying to generate your PDF in the background. You could try again or wait and see if you can submit this manually. Would that be something we could do? I mean, like some of the stuff about we were kind of worried about with background processing is like it's going to create a cached version of the document that's going to get stale. But on an
Mhm.
error screen, we don't have that concern.
I see. Just always using the cache or like always refresh false or something.
Or pre-generating it at least, like show people, okay, wait here. We're trying to create your recovery PDF in the background.
I
And we
see.
won't have to worry about the timeout. That is my point.
I see. That makes sense. I think that would be doable. Yeah. I don't
Do you
it'd
think-
be-
Is that like a priority we should try to work on before we do release? I mean, and
I think
to be
failure
honest, like
states
we've
is a
had
priority.
2.5 years of launches. This isn't that different from other launches. We haven't had
No.
these features for other
The main
launches.
difference is fairly minor, which is just that we call where everything is synchronous and like the user clicks through and it's like, oh, like you have officially e-filed now. Whereas I think in other things we start a background process to send the email and we don't wait for it. And that's really the only big difference though. That and things are just generally can be a bit more flaky and finicky due to Tyler issues than they normally would. But you're right. I don't think there's a ton of there's not like a huge difference.
Well, I think the error page is something we talked about doing, like it was on my list to prioritize like a year ago and I never did. And the DA catch-all is something I use in other interviews regularly. I just haven't,
Mhm.
we haven't had a deep discussion about it here to see if we should turn it on for assembly line interviews or not.
Mhm.
Or make it an option at least. I guess it's not really a thing to turn on or off. We could just make it an optional include people could use.
That's fair. I've always liked the idea of it. It seems like it is like another thing that makes it a bit more complicated, but
Right.
the general idea I like, instead of having just completely fail, still have a nicer failing screen that's like, hey, something's gone wrong. Here's the detailed thing that's gone wrong. If you let us know about it, and also here's all of this other information. So it's just not an error screen.
Well, the catch-all isn't the same as the error screen. So the catch-all is like type in an answer,
Oh,
which you can't give people a lot of context to it.
yeah.
It's just going to be maybe applying some regular way to transform the variable name into, if they did a good job naming the variable, it will look like a question.
I see. Okay. I was misunderstanding. Mm,
I've used this on big interviews and I haven't run into real problems with it, but
mhm. When you say real problems with it, do you mean people actually using it and like it showing up, or do you mean like?
so I usually use it for
it
like a
shows up in
generic
users.
interview. Like I used it at
Mhm.
GDLS for letting people upload documents they wanted to send their client and get a signature. So like
Oh, okay.
if they, they can add extra questions, basically they want the user to answer.
Uh-huh.
And we don't have to have a pre-written question for it.
I see. Okay.
You want to try clicking on the example so you can see what it
Sorry.
does. It might help.
That's fair. I think I was definitely misthinking about what this one was compared to the hair.
So this interview doesn't have a question that defines username. It has a catch-all question instead that's
Yeah.
being triggered here.
Object name instance.
But it's needed on this mandatory screen, so it's triggering the catch-all.
Mhm.
And then if we go to the next one, it knows that salary is an amount because
So I was
it's
gonna
triggered in the context of being a float.
I see. I was just about to ask because I feel like that's the one thing I'm not sure how that would work. If it
Got
turns
an
out you
if
need
statement.
something specific.
Here,
Oh, I see.
it's this right there. Yeah.
So you make
I mean, you're making assumptions about how the interview is using different types of values, obviously. So it's basically looking the same thing that tells Python, that lets Python, you create all those dunder methods, right? That creates a context, and then it triggers a specific method on an object to provide that response or that kind of anything you could replace with the double underscore method
Mhm.
name in a Python object class, I guess.
Gotcha.
You can catch as a context here, and then you can use that context to provide a customized question. So it's not, I mean, truthfully, like where will people run into this? It's almost always going to be a string. So
I feel like sometimes people would run into it with like, or at least which I don't know if how much is I get mixed up with just like, oh, this is the development process versus like this is something that could have slipped through and might be a bug in a final interview, but stuff like there is another or like gathering essentially. And it gets normally gathering isn't too bad, but it gets kind of complicated when you are e-filing and like some of the information you are like the program is explicitly adding to users and stuff like that. And there's some defaults, but I know I've just run into that before. I don't know how often, if any of that ever really gets past just the development stage though.
Yeah. What do you want to explain? Like what are the things you're saying? I don't know if I totally understand it. I think there is any is one of the things that you could not define a question for. Is that really what you're saying? Like
it's sometimes there is any, but it's sometimes there is another. So essentially like when e-filing, you'll get the case, grab the case information from Tyler and like assemble like the right AL individual with the information from Tyler and then add that to users or add that to other parties. And since there's like several different ways you could be using that information, like if you're grabbing it from like the housing court and it's going into the appeals, or you're grabbing it from like just the court you are filing in, or you're or like you're trying to file into a case that you can't find a user, but like you're allowed to add a user in that case. Essentially, there's just like a lot of different combinations of logic in there. And so sometimes I've like has gotten left out of like setting there is another to be false or like there is another to be true or something like that automatically in the interview. And when it slips through, it will like break.
okay. And it will
And again,
break
I don't
by
know.
like looking for that definition.
Yes.
Basically,
yeah.
it's like you're basically saying, okay, you have the code set up for one of the common logic branches, but you missed. Okay, that's probably why it would slip through, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And so I don't know, and that feels like it's just a bug, but I don't know if it's like, and obviously it should, and that's the thing is with the catch-all, I feel like I get kind of confused if this is like, if we can think about it and like, we know that it's an issue, shouldn't we just try to provide better fallbacks for things than a catch-all? But I don't know.
Like a generic, there are any question basically that works for any list, maybe.
Yeah, like a lot more generic stuff, essentially. I don't know.
Those will always get used first. So it could be a yes and.
That's true.
I think one thing to think about maybe is adding logging associated with the string being triggered.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. I think I could do that.
I guess we really want not just logging, but to send an email since we're not like monitoring the logs on the production site.
Yeah.
But does like the basic idea feel like there's something worth trying there?
Just providing more common fallbacks.
I feel like that is yeah, you're right. That's like having more fallbacks and then having the meta fallback of catch-all. But of course, it's always better to have a more specific fallback.
So my experience with office hours and having people come in with confusions about that kind of thing is that they're confused either way. Like if there is a question that they're not expecting and they want to change it, they're confused about how to do that. Or if there's no question, they're confused about how to deal with an undefined variable. Granted, I don't get to see how many people aren't confused by either of those or are confused by one and the other, right? Versus the other. So it's a selected group of people, but of the people that come into office hours with those kinds of confusions, it seems they find them equally confusing. So I'm just saying I don't see a downside. If I saw that people dealt better with, the variables undefined, so I get an error, so that's clearer to me, then I'd say that's better developer experience. But from what I can see,
Something we could do.
Just as confusing.
That's really good insight, Michelle. that's helpful to hear, like what kind of questions people come into you and how they feel. I'm thinking like one thing we could do is if you're on a developer mode site, if your site's in dev mode, we could add extra information and context on that screen. It
Yeah,
says,
that would be
hey,
very
did
cool.
you shouldn't see this. We shouldn't be seeing this screen. Here is how you would write a question for this. So that way people have something to copy right there.
Yeah,
Does that sound? It feels like something we could easily
more
do.
instructions is, yeah, I've forgotten we can do customized stuff based on a developer or production server.
Yeah, I do really like that idea. I have a similar thing in the e-filing where like if it's a developer server, like if you get an error back from the e-filing server, which is usually like, oh, Tyler needs you to have this other thing that like we can't know about in DocAssemble, it does that. A similar thing. It's probably not well phrased, but it's essentially the same thing of, oh, this is an author error screen. Here's some information to help you fix this error. Whereas on a normal interview, we would just say like, sorry, something's gone wrong. Here are your documents. But I like the idea a lot. And that would probably push me towards using catch-alls a bit more, I think.
Yeah, we
If-
definitely
if-
don't want to make it harder for developers to know what's happening if we use them.
Yeah, but I think they would be a good idea for like it's a good step towards, if we at least thinking about it in terms of primarily to help the developer experience, I think is a good idea. And the added slight side benefit of it doesn't completely break things if something's wrong in a production review is good, but primarily I think it should be a developer thing.
Okay, I like that's good focus for the feature too. Okay, so now we know there are errors other than undefined variable errors that will appear for users sometimes. So the other side of that is the error handling page. I wonder if there's anything we should define about that we should discuss here to think about how to build that feature. And what issue was that again? 245?
The 232 is the meta
232.
issue.
Okay.
I think if the question is, should we handle it? I think having graceful failures is fantastic.
Yeah,
As
the
to how we
DocAssemble.
should handle it, I'm not, as sure.
Yeah. I agree with Michelle. It's probably, I don't think it's useful to hide too much information. However, the DocAssemble dumps are horrible even for like us, at least for me specifically, like trying to find the actual thing. And so I think that the thing that would be hard on the air screen is what we just mentioned, had the short discussion about earlier, of making sure that the PDF, like trying to make sure that generating something for the users so they just aren't like, oh, well, out of luck, would be trying to make that also rigorous, and so it doesn't break the air screen would be a good idea.
I'm thinking that because we have our attachments set up to be dictionaries with various versions, like we would have a version that is the fallback version for an attachment, which would have whatever options make it safest to generate, essentially. That's kind of the way I was thinking of doing it. And then I think the other important thing is to make sure it happens in a background process so the timeouts don't prevent people from seeing the screen. That's one first item for discussion, I guess. So basically, this would be an extra key in the AL document. That's maybe too specific for implementation detail, but
No, that makes sense though. What would it? I'm trying to think of how that would be different than preview or something, though, right?
Well, I guess the one thing we could do is make sure it always has skip undefined true turned on for it. It's not a big thing. It
I
might
see.
be different from the preview equals true because but really mostly if they don't have skip defined undefined turned on, which isn't, I just don't know how often that will happen, but since it comes on that way from the Weaver.
Are we saying that if skip undefined equals false and there's an error, we would change skip undefined to true and try again?
Well, we're saying if we have an error screen, that we would always show a version that has skip undefined true turned on. It wouldn't necessarily, so, but the error could be
That
triggered by any
solve
number
all
of
the
things.
Problems, yeah, that's the. We could try and then have a fallback for that fallback.
I mean, the thing is, like, skip undefined, if we're also putting on the catch-all, like that kind of, they kind of cancel each other out a little bit. Like, you won't really get the skip undefined benefit if we have catch-all.
Sure. I do want to point out, I'm not sure that it matters that much, but if we have a catch-all, like a really basic catch-all, that really catches everything, then it would be able to pass a random input test without being detected, without a manual investigation. Just putting that out there.
Good point. I mean, I think, yeah,
I
that's a
mean,
good implementation detail to think about.
Similarly, for if you have naive developers, you know, you have students trying to help and they go through the entire interview and they say, yeah, I got through all the screens. So also for other types of naive testing, right?
We could probably do the same thing. Like, we could find a way to make it really visible, both to the automated tests and to
Sure.
student developers, that,
Sure,
hey,
we
this
can
screen's
make it
not to be here. We
customization.
could make it a big bright red background or something, right? Only in developer
Yeah.
mode.
And we could give it a class or ID for Kiln to find.
For sure. Yeah.
Then we could also use that.
That's a good thought. What about this error screen? Like, we don't know what kind of errors will trigger it yet. I mean, I guess it's any kind of error, but it probably won't be missing variable errors, to be clear. That's there other information we would need to have defined. I guess we'd want to let people get to the home page. That might be something for us to talk about. I mean, I've seen some very unhelpful error screens from websites, but given the context of what we're trying to do, which is help people file like important forms in the court, is there anything we want to make sure we do well? Probably find some guidance on what people suggest you should do for error screens.
Yeah, I think maybe we should make kind of a list of possible error screens and find it, because if we just go, hey, randomly, what would you want to see on an error screen? They might not. If we're really going to ask people, we might prepare a more detailed way to ask them. Like, hey, did you know you could run into this error? What would you want on this error screen?
On that meta issue, we do have a list of possible errors, and I don't know. I don't know if it's specifically comprehensive, but it covers a lot of them.
Yeah, let's take a look at that. Yeah, I don't know if we have to do like a survey of folks, but I was thinking if we just Googled people's advice on how to do, like, what is general UX advice on running good error screens, we'd probably find some. But we'd want to add some context specific to what we're doing. That was my thought, but. I feel like infinite
Yeah.
loop, we're not going to really be able to solve. Docsemble's not that good at detecting infinite loops.
Mm,
It is sometimes.
It is
It
sometimes.
is sometimes. Says infinite loop found.
It'll generally, at least in my experience, if it is an infinite loop, it will tell you it's an infinite loop instead of timing out, which is like the only other alternative. So
Right.
Mm.
I mean, there's, yeah, anyway, obviously there's the halting problem.
Yeah. I mean, and they're infinite loop questions.
These are the
but
same
That's probably
thing.
not the thing we're talking about.
Working, we're working on this. This is a JavaScript front-end problem that I've run into, actually. We should really see if we can figure out a better way to do that on DocAssemble upstream. These errors, I don't run into them anymore, but I know students do.
Yeah,
This wouldn't be
a
solved.
lot of people do.
yeah, well, there was a particularly tricky one that I think you were solving recently, Michelle. That was like the wrong page or something.
It was a variable that wasn't defined. That
It was like a
Yeah.
typo on the
show
screen, basically, right?
That was in a show if specifically. So an undefined variable in a show if, and that wasn't caught by DocAssembly.
Yeah,
Or
I mean, we do think that our linter will try to warn people about this, right? That's not what we said. We'll probably catch some of it with static
evaluation.
code checking. This is one we'll probably run into that we would want to be able to handle. I wonder, this makes me think, do we need to add a download in progress? The menu. It just lets you just say, okay, stop answering questions, download whatever I have ready.
No, I like that idea.
It's not very
Not-
discoverable, but it's at least something we could tell people to do if we're giving phone support.
oh, just like so they could like go back and then download the form in progress.
Thinking of
I'm-
this like where you're stuck on a screen with the show if bug.
Mhm.
There's no way, you don't get an error screen. You're just stuck on a screen and nothing's
Just for-
happening.
Okay, sorry.
We could tell people, hey, just use the menu to get to the download your form for now. So at least you have something.
Yeah.
That's fair, I guess. Yeah.
I don't know if it's that useful, but not too hard to do, probably.
Gives me a thought that I'd forgotten about using with random input testing using screen IDs. Maybe I put that in there. I have to write it down.
Oh, another thing that this made me think about is the HUD that we have right now. It has the version number of the interview and the assembly line. I don't feel like I've ever used that information. But what would be nice for a lot of students is to have an easier way to see what variable is triggering that screen, which is often impossible with DocAssemble's stack trace.
Yeah.
What do people think
sure.
about making that change?
Yeah, and we already have that information because it's in the clone stuff. So I like that idea.
I think we have asked before, usually people who can look in the packages folder, the packages management. But we have asked before, what version of assembly line are you running?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I've done that in the last year, but
I've definitely used it a few times. Like I don't know if it's worth it to get rid of it. Maybe, but I generally end up having issues just with the idea of versions anyway, because oh, this version could be any of these other 3 commits if you're committed off of GitHub.
Point.
And so it's less of, I don't know if I don't think we can get commit hashes. That would be nice, slightly better, but I don't think we can get that all the time or consistently.
Yeah.
It would be a little overhead on every page, I guess, too. Yeah, so I'm just trying to think, could we fit another line here?
I mean, why not for developers? It's not gonna be there for production, so. And
Well, I know
mean,
when
it
I've
could- it
tested
could be
stuff-
next to ID, could be on the same line as ID on the other side.
I don't want to do that because I always tell people to copy the whole line, which is really easy to do.
Oh, okay, got it.
Maybe this part's not so important. I guess it's helpful if we were going to record, like watch a video somebody recorded of a test,
Exactly.
but then you have control over what link you sent them.
But do you remember to note? I guess, I mean, no, but even if you send them a link, you don't know what version of assembly line they had in their packages at the time. I mean, that the server had in, even if it was your server, you're not like, oh, I sent this link at the time when the package was this, right?
Yeah, that's true. Okay, we'll add another line, I guess, then. We can just try it and see how it goes. I think I've had testers get confused by this information. So adding it, making it being more visible was something I was like, well, do we need this still? But we could just try it and see. I think people do need that information of like what question is triggering the screen, because now we have so many initial blocks
Yeah.
that it's really useless to try to scroll through.
I usually scroll to the bottom, but yeah.
But then sometimes the bottom, if you're on a screen that has like a
Sometimes
name
there's
fields
extra
question, for
stuff.
example, then the bottom's not the right place either. Like you have to get to the middle, which is
Yeah.
annoying.
If we do put it up there, can we put it up there as a trigger variable? Because that'll be consistent with.
The name of
um,
that we use for it, you mean?
Yeah, with Kiln.
Seems fine, I guess. I don't know if that's going to be that transparent to people who aren't doing automated
Or the
testing.
variable that triggered this page, just using the word
Yeah,
trigger. is
explaining it, I think,
useful.
is nice. Okay. I think that works. Okay, that's an easy change. This is an easy change. I have some really great catch-alls I could just swap in. We could just try it. Maybe that's something to do this week. Error action, I haven't ever tried, but it feels like something that's actually pretty straightforward. Just to take people away from seeing.
Maybe a link to the issue, by the way, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I was thinking of going the other way, like taking these notes and creating issues for things that aren't there yet. But you're right.
Oh, I thought that was to do with one of the existing ones in there. Sorry.
There's no issue for this, for example. These do have existing issues, but I think it's just one meta issue we need to create some smaller issues from specific to-dos.
I was just saying number 2. I thought it wasn't separate. I thought it was part of the other issues.
I could indent these one level, but it just makes it harder to
Okay.
read. I'll do it. All right.
Thanks. possibly. Yeah.
I guess that's pretty much it. You don't want to have it be too much information on that screen.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what would be our like success date? Well, how would we know we're ready to turn these features on? I could obviously try the code. What would we want to test to make sure we're ready to deploy it? Do we feel like these are intrusive questions, changes that need more discussion before we turn them on? Or do we feel like once they're ready, they're fairly safe if they work and aren't broken in other ways?
I feel like the order of ease of release is the trigger variable change first, obviously, and then
Yeah.
probably the error one, and then probably the catch-all. Like I think the catch-all is going to be the most we need to figure out if we're doing this in the right way and not making it somehow more difficult to complete interviews, both from the author side and from the other side. Although, if I'm understanding how catch-all works, we have to set in that particular interview, like use fallback equals true, right? Like it's
True.
something we have to set
It's a
in the
feature
features
that's
of that
turned
interview.
on
So
per
it
interview,
isn't, yeah. So if it's per interview, I don't think that's actually a bit not as big of an issue because it'll only be new ones. And I don't think we have many new, like we will have to add it to the Weaver first, essentially, before it starts becoming a thing that a lot of people use.
Well, we don't have to put it in the Weaver. We could make it be something that's set at a file that people already include, or we could have it be set in a new file that people can choose to include.
Do the features work like that?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that features and interviews were inherited like that. Sorry, Michelle, you're okay.
I was just saying that before we start work extensively on stuff like custom error handling and catch-all, we want to check with our current users whether they would find that disruptive, because we could do a whole lot of work and then find out people don't want it at all.
Yeah, we're some of our current users, right? So I think I think the
true.
important thing is to not change people's live forms without letting them decide if they want to opt in.
Yeah,
We've certainly
a
found out.
separate file to include or something.
Yeah.
Similarly with the error handling, I think.
The error handling, I feel like no one actually likes the built-in error handling, but we have to
But
make
they
it
might
clear.
not like ours better.
Well, I think
Depending on how
we have
do
to
it.
decide where we add certain kinds of things like branding, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Like I don't think anybody wants this was maybe one thing. I couldn't remember if the custom error handling page would prevent the email from working. We should test that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully this was a good exercise. I'm gonna have to, I have a 12:30 and I need to step off for a few minutes before that.
Mhm.
But yeah, I feel like we could probably work on some of these. They won't be ready by next week, but
Just
we could have them ready pretty soon after, I think. They're not actually that
maybe
big.
want to- Is it okay if I add to this the note about kiln sepper that you add to it or something? I'm gonna forget this.
Yeah, I can add that. I'm also editing. So.
Okay.
Oh, this is the thing that you were talking about with Bryce before we started recording.
Yeah, it was just a quick. We actually had started the recording, which is why I apologize. But, just that it'll be a separate step instead of
Yeah.
A breaking change. Just have to figure out the wording for it. Anyway. Yeah.
I've seen a
Yeah,
lot.
I'll figure it out when I read it.
Callables.
Well, I've seen like I don't know, working with what somebody who's building a bunch of templates, and we have a generic interview that's like the whole framework for it, and then they always make mistakes with putting
I don't know what
parentheses after
callables
things.
are.
It means like a function
I see.
or a method. And I don't think any of the catch-alls that I'd written handled that scenario, but I feel like we could easily, I want to see if we can
Okay.
do something for that situation. Okay. I mean, yeah, I think I could work on these ideas this week and probably have some stuff ready for people to test by next week, honestly. The exception of letting people download their documents, that sounds like the biggest feature. But
Yeah.
just an error handling page, which lets them, which is a little friendlier. That seems easy. And the catch-all I've done a million times. So, okay. Yeah, any closing thoughts?
It was great.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, good,
All right.
good discussions.
Oh yeah, Bryce, if you have, that's all like lower priority than like interview refinement stuff that you want to outsource to me. Just let me know the best issues for me to work on.
Yes, yeah. I do think, honestly, I think most of the other ones I had just sort of done before you had mentioned that, and I was like, oh, yeah, that probably would have been a good idea. But I think most of them are in. I'm checking like the email stuff right now. But I think everything else has sort of been. If for some reason Illinois comes back with a lot of like smaller things that are issues, I might ask for some of your help there. But otherwise, I don't think there's a lot.
And you can just send me, if they give it to us as like an email, hey, here's a list of the things you want to do. You can just give me that list and I can look at it. Okay. You don't have to triage it beforehand.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that would help. Thanks.